got a little after 10. So, yeah, today we are starting the 1940s. We're not going to go through the entire era of the 1940s. We're going 1940 to the end of World War II, which is 1945. So, I think I've got enough for a presentation. So, any questions, thoughts, or comments before I begin? Glad that y'all are here again. Let's see if this works. So, this is the map that I showed at the end of last month's presentation. It's from 1932, which is the closest to 1940, thank you, that I have. And it shows the major communities, places like Live Oak, Branford, Dowling Park, even Welburn's on there. Some of these, even at this point, are just a little more the names on the map. Places like Emerson, Newburgh to an extent, just not much there at this point. Hildreth, maybe a country store or two, but not much. So that's kind of a map closest to 1940 that I do have. So, as we start 1940, in November of 1940, November 4th to be precise, B.W. Helvenston, the original B.W. Helvenston, was in Jacksonville. He was at a luncheon that was honoring him for being the longest serving insurance salesman for the New York Life insurance company. So he was being honored. He wasn't feeling well, but he went there, he got up, did a speech from memory, and then got down and promptly had a fatal heart attack. So he was no longer the longest serving, or longest living, member, that kind of stuff. So he passed away in 1940.
Just never
It's just that stank. But he served for many, many decades at that point, starting in the 1890s, which he established B.W. Helvenston and Sons 1892. So it was, and still is, the oldest family-run business in town and in Suwannee County. So that's a more recent picture of it. Not where it was when he was around, but it's moved a couple times since then. But he passed away in 1940. He did a lot of things over his career. He used to be a principal, and I told you the story when we talked about the 1890s, but he was a school principal for the high school, but he also was selling insurance, and so the school board came up to him and said, hey, you pick, either be the principal or sell the insurance, don't do both. So he chose the insurance, and he kept doing that. He also was instrumental in getting the city cemetery established. He was kind of the guy behind that. Moved his own family, part of his own family there on that property. Helvenston Street, we still have that today in Live Oak. That was kind of set up as a better way to come into town, because by the late 1890s, early 1900s, when Live Oak was one of the biggest cities in the state of Florida, Highway 90, Howard Street at that point, on the east end was where a lot of our factories were. We had ice plants, sawmills, factories and stuff on that end. And so he didn't like having to drive by them coming into town. And so he basically set up Helvenston Street as a better, prettier way to come into town. So that remained as the main entrance into town, became Highway 90 way back when, until it was straightened out in the 50s, I believe. So he had done a lot of good for the county and for the city. So, you can't talk about the early 1940s without talking about World War II, which began in September of 1939. And if you recall, or know your history, we stayed out of it, more or less, for a couple of years after Hitler invaded Poland. But we knew war was coming. The federal government knew that eventually we'd probably be in war. And so the National Guard Company here in Florida, our local National Guard Company here in Live Oak and Suwannee County, was called up to start training new soldiers. And that was really their first job. Their first service was to train other soldiers, because our National Guard unit had done more service than probably any other in Florida at that point. We had a bunch of pretty highly trained guys that had been doing this. And so we were training the other soldiers. November 25th, 1940, which is a year before this happened, Pearl Harbor, before we were plunged into the war, our unit was called into service in Fort Benning in Georgia. And they started training Army officers. Later on, they went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to train the regular soldiers also. And so they were doing a lot of that. Now, when wartime came, our unit that was here in Suwannee County was kind of split in two. Half of them went with the 30th Infantry Division, and the other went with the 31st Infantry Division. So some went to Europe, some went to the Pacific Theater. So we had a lot of guys that were all around the world during this war. Now, on December 7th, 1940, exactly 1 year before the war, Thomas Earl McKeithen, who was 23 years old at the time, became the first from Suwannee County to volunteer for the draft. So, a lot of service. We had a lot of guys, I'm sure you knew, probably related to some of them, who served in the war. Some of them did not come back, and those who did not come back have been honored by the Veterans Memorial in downtown Live Oak. You can go there and see all their names. I'll show you later on some of the names that I know of that are listed on there and where they died and that kind of stuff. So when you look at the old newspapers, the Suwannee Democrat specifically, from this point on, you got actually from the time of Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, you see a lot of war-related news, not just in Poland or in Germany, that area, but as we get into the war, you see information about, so-and-so's gone off to training, so-and-so's just written a letter back home to his parents, so-and-so's missing in action. I was looking at one just this morning, and it was talking about our deadliest day so far, our deadliest week so far, and it had 4 or 5 guys from Suwannee County that had been killed in action, and 3 or 4 that were missing in action. Some of them later were determined to be dead. Some of them later were determined to be prisoners of war. So it was very deadly, of course, not just for Suwannee County, but the entire world. Millions of people literally were killed. Oh, back to the Pearl Harbor, one more thing. Attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Soon, I don't think it's been cataloged and posted yet, but soon if you go to the Suwannee County Museum in Live Oak, you will see a piece of the USS Arizona that is there. That was donated by a teacher, long-time teacher here, whose father served in World War II. I knew about him before I realized who it was, because I love military history. World War II is like my favorite war, especially naval military history. And Battle of Midway is my favorite battle. June 4th through 6th, 1942, kind of the turning point in a way in the Pacific Theater where the Americans defeated the Japanese, sank a lot of carriers. I could speak for hours about it, but this gentleman, this Mr. Roy was his name, he took the photographs that you see in books and videos and documentaries all over the place. He's the one that took the pictures. He was on the USS Yorktown, which was sunk in the battle, but he took lots of pictures. And so pretty much every picture I know of growing up in World War II from the Battle of Midway, this guy took, and then realized his daughter was a teacher here. I remember her in school and stuff. So very interesting, but he was given a piece of the USS Arizona as part of the token. And he's also got some stuff from Midway there too. So again, it's in the middle of being cataloged at the museum, but if you want to go the next few months, it should hopefully be posted in the military section there.
Do you know what part of the ship that came from?
Assuming it's part of the superstructure, but I don't recall offhand which part. It was just a piece from the USS Arizona. So, there's a piece about that big, rusted metal at this point, but I think it was part that was cut up in the 1990s. But again, that's just from memory. But it's in there, it's framed in a nice wooden box thing, so interesting. Anyway, very sentimental. Since at Pearl Harbor we had over 2,000 deaths, half of them came from just that ship. Again, I can talk about military history forever, but I won't. So as we go to war, between 50 and 70% of our men that are working in the farms, our farm hands, they go off to war. So somebody's got to pick up what's going on. So women jump really into the workforce en masse for the first time in our history. And tobacco was still being gathered as usual. Crop prices were soaring, even with the war going on. Of course, lots of prices were soaring with the war going on. But tobacco kind of continued as usual. This picture is from much later, the 1980s, I believe. I think that's Cecil Moore. I don't know if any of y'all from here might have known him, but he was big in the tobacco business. But I mean, that's kind of still what it looked like, even with the war going on. But there were some changes. We had issues, differences. Rationing was introduced. So it would provide the necessary items for our armed forces. And any of y'all remember rationing? There we go. All kinds of fun stuff, right? Let's see, tires, sugar, butter, gasoline, things like that were rationed. Yeah, they had drives to collect metal, to collect rubber, to collect things that could be reused or melted down and reused for the military. So because of these shortages, here's one of the local ration packs that I was given a copy of or a picture of from one of the local areas. Just showing you all kinds of stuff, so much beef per week, and just, it's interesting to see it. I like to eat, I don't know if you can tell, but I do like to eat. And the thought that I wouldn't be able to eat as much meat, I love meat, that's rough. It's like, I don't want to have to eat grass. Maybe I can find something in between. But, some of you have lived through that. You understand what it's like to only have a little bit of meat per week because most of it's going to the troops. But we survived. The country survived. Do what?
Weeds.
Yeah.
Weeds that would cook up. Yeah.
You learn how to do that.
Milkweed.
Yeah. Those home demonstration clubs promoted, locally especially promoted food conservation. Don't get rid of it, don't waste it, can it, or do something with it. Put it in glass jars, tin cans. The county actually opened a canning kitchen in the armory, the old armory on Wilbur Street that's gone, and they taught lessons to citizens to help them learn how to preserve what little they could have. Also in 1945, frozen food preservation was introduced in Suwannee County. So that helped. Of course, the war ended in that same year, but it helped for the future, learning how to preserve those things by freezing them instead of by canning. Now, I remember, even myself, I grew up poor. I remember as a kid canning stuff. I hated doing it. It's like, I want to eat it. No, you can't eat it now. You gotta wait. That's for this winter or whatever. So even I remember canning stuff, tomatoes and vegetables, whatever else we had growing up on the farm, so to speak. Also, one of the other things those home demonstration agents did was they showed how to make mattresses with what was available, things like moss. Y'all remember moss mattresses? My grandfather does, talks about it sometimes. And moss toilet paper, for instance. He mentions that sometimes too. Make sure the red buttons are off first. He said that's some good stuff, with the red buttons out of it. Better than the corn cobs that he also used. We lived in the country. Where I grew up, and where he grew up out in the country, didn't have power until after the war, so he was used to outhouses and such. USS Swan. There have actually been several naval ships named the Suwannee over the years. One during the Civil War era, one during the Spanish-American War, another one during World War I. But this is the most famous USS Swan that was built. Now, this ship was built actually as a commercial oil tanker, completed, I think, in 1940, before we got to the war. The United States Navy, as they were preparing and realizing, hey, there's probably a war coming on, they started requisitioning ships that they could use. And so this ship that was not named the Swanee at the time was taken over. I think it was the Mack, was her name. She was taken over as a naval oiler, but by 1942, right after the war had started, again, I could talk for hours about this, but World War II kind of shifted military thought, naval thought. Before that point, for the last 40, 50, 60 years, there had been battleships were the big things, the big guns. They could fire for dozens of miles. But then the aircraft carrier had come on the scene, and after Pearl Harbor and shortly thereafter, countries realized, hey, the carrier, the aircraft carrier, is the capital ship of the future. And so we started requisitioning ships that we could use as carriers. And this tanker was one. She was converted into what was called an escort carrier, a small carrier. They also called Jeep carriers and lots of other stuff. But basically, they were small carriers that could carry about 30 or 40 planes compared to the larger carriers, like 100 planes on those. So she was a little carrier, escort carrier, and she made her mark in American naval history. She served first in the Atlantic Theater. Her first operation was the invasion of North Africa, which was called Operation Torch. in November of 1942. And she made history by being the first American escort carrier to sink an enemy sub in combat. And that's kind of what a lot of these carriers were used for. These escort carriers were used for, was to hunt down enemy submarines. And she was the first to do that in the Atlantic theater. She also became one of the few ships to sink enemy ships in both theaters, because she sank a Japanese sub in 1944 in the Pacific theater. So she was very important for that. Her first captain, again, I love military, especially naval history. And so the first time I saw his name, I recognized it. His name was J.J. He went by Jocko Clark. And he was the first Native American to graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy. And he was the Suwannee's first captain. He shortly thereafter became an admiral, and was a very famous admiral in a lot of battles and stuff. So a lot of history to her. Suwannee fought in lots of actions, again, both in the Atlantic and Pacific. And in 1944, she was involved in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which was the largest naval battle in all of world history. Hundreds and hundreds of ships, thousands or tens of thousands of square miles. It's actually several smaller battles that are one big battle. And pretty much it was Japan's last big push to try to defeat the Americans before we got into Japanese territory. So it's off the Philippine Islands, and the U.S. Suwannee was one of those that was involved, especially off what's called the action off Samar. And what happened was basically we had lots of troop transports that were landing our soldiers in the Philippines, and the Japanese decided, hey, let's split our forces up and let's try to draw off all the big ships, all the big naval ships away, and then send in a battleship force to sink all these transports. And it pretty much worked. Our big carriers went off going after the enemy carriers, even though they were pretty much just decoys. And a Japanese fleet of battleships and bigger ships came in to attack the troop transports that were pretty much defenseless, other than the USS Suwannee and a few other little carriers. I mean, these are small ships, 18 knots, 5-inch guns which 5-inch guns have about a 60-pound shell. They were going up against ships that could go 30+ knots with guns up to 18 inches, which that shell is about 3,000 pounds. Armor plated, the biggest battleship in the world at the time. I mean, it was a David versus Goliath. And all the carriers had were their planes. So they're trying to run away while they're sending their planes to try to attack. Well, eventually the planes ran out of ammunition and torpedoes and bombs, so they're actually just buzzing down and pretending to shoot just to throw the Japanese off guard. Well, it works. The Americans inflict heavy casualties on the Japanese. They turn and run away. They were that close to sinking our invasion fleet, which would have put the war back by years probably. And those tens of thousands of troops would have been massacred. Well, the Suwannee was one of those that helped fight them off. So it's a big battle, and if you know anything about World War II, you've probably heard of that battle. She is damaged. Actually, that same battle is when kamikazes are first used. Divine Wind. It was basically the Japanese way of trying to push away the invasion that was coming. Kamikaze means divine wind. What happened was in the 1500s, the Chinese were invading Japan, and a hurricane came up, or a typhoon came up, and destroyed the Chinese fleet. And so it was called the kamikaze, the divine wind. It came from the Japanese gods. And so what the Japanese decided to do was, we're not winning this with ordinary military means. Let's just have planes with pilots and crash into enemy ships. And so that's what happened. The Suwannee, you can see the picture of her on the left as the plane's going to crash, and this was her being hit by one of them, October 25th. She was actually hit by 2 kamikazes within about 2 days. She lost 107 dead and 160 wounded out of a crew of about 1,000. So 1/3 of her crew was either dead or wounded. Several of her sister ships were sunk. It brought on a lot of devastation. And these kamikazes and the attacks killed basically more sailors than any of the other attacks in the 3 or 4 years leading up to that. So very deadly. An interesting thing was with USS Suwannee, one of those who died in that attack was the uncle of somebody that lives here, a guy by the name of Rob Wolf. I don't know if you know him. He worked at PCS for many years. He takes photographs around the county. I just ran into him a couple days ago again. But he's told me several times about his uncle that was killed in the Swan. He didn't even live here at the time. Anyway, Suwannee survived the war, and was scrapped in 1962. So again, I love Navy stuff, so I probably just put y'all to sleep. But it's interesting to me. It may be me alone. Meanwhile, while our men and women, mainly men, are fighting overseas, and some of them dying, we've got life trying to continue on as normal as much as possible here in Suwannee County. So here are, the next few slides are going to show the downtown Live Oak area. I don't remember who it was, but they took photographs of pretty much downtown Live Oak. So it's nice to have some pictures of them. This is the southwest corner of the main intersection in Live Oak, Howard and Ohio. And this was the commercial bank building. This building I've talked about before is, if not the oldest existing brick building in Live Oak, it's one of the oldest, built in 1884. And this served as a commercial bank for many years until Hurricane Dora in 1964. Then they moved further south. So that's it. Today it's actually the office of Rhett Bullard, who's an attorney. The building on the left is McCrory's. If you were from here, you remember McCrory's, yep.
It wrapped around, that
The back over
right
here.
there is where it wrapped
Yeah.
around the bank, came out.
Yep. Yeah, so there's part of it, there's the other part over there. And it was there for many, many years, 5 and dime store basically. And right now today is the public defender's office. Let's see, this is on the southeast corner of Ohio and Howard, and this at the time was the Seminole Cafe, which had been run by that point several years by a guy we talked about a month or two ago, named Mike Sacrios, one of our only Greek residents for many decades. But he ran that. It was pretty much a local watering hole for white citizens anyway. You ever go there?
It was,
Seminole Cafe? Too expensive probably, right, for you? Not that it was expensive, but you know what I mean. But it was kind of that's where a lot of the big wigs would go to eat. So it ran for many years, eventually closed up shop. But it's now B.W. Helmison and H. That's where their office is now. And this is the northwest corner of that same intersection. And so this is the Suwannee Drug Company, one of 2 drugstores across the street from one another. Served under various owners for many, many decades. And now it's a consignment shop in other places. Right here you can barely make it out. It says theater. That was one of our theaters that we had, movie theaters. Right now it's where Susie's is, but this was one of the movie theaters that we had in Suwannee County, and specifically in Live Oak. Yes. Yes.
Elvinston's original office is just to the right there of the drugstore, and my grandfather's barber shop was to the right of there.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, on this corner, which is where Home Pharmacy was run by Roy Hunter. So that's where it was, I mean, that's where Helmson's was until a few years ago when they moved, yeah. I'm assuming it was the original location.
I think it was, yeah.
All the pictures I've seen showing it there. And that barber shop next door. Good point to bring out. But this is on the northeast corner, and Dr. Roy Hunter ran that for a long time. I think he bought out the Suwannee Drug Company later on. But he was a member of the Kiwanis Club, and if I recall, he never missed a meeting in his lifetime. He was in it for 50 years or so. But he ran that, so we had 2 drugstores right across from one another. You'll also see right here, the Alomar Theater, which was another one of our theaters. We talked about it a couple months ago. So lots of stuff happening downtown. The newspaper talks about in March of 1942, we hit our newest public building, and that was on the northeast corner of Howard and Texada Streets, which I think they just renamed it to Tuxedo Street recently. It was Texada originally, but I guess they thought it was misspelled. I don't know, anyway. I wasn't a part of that. It was Texada, and it was named after a person, but they thought it was supposed to be Tuxedo, and somebody couldn't spell it right, I think. So now it's Tuxedo Street. But anyway, this Greyhound Bus Station was run by Mr. and Mrs. James Hall, and they ran it. It's now where the Jordan Insurance Agency is, so it's still there. Pool Realty's just over to the left. The bus station had been in the old Parsley building, which was across from the courthouse, looks like. Another, well, drawing in a picture, something else that opened up in 1942 was Johnny's Grill. And it was another popular local hangout for those who like to eat, fine dining, I guess you could say. But it was a grill, lots of good stuff. Seafood, chicken, steaks, and chops, and a package shop you could go to. It was opened by the Clill brothers, who were Johnny and Ford. They were big businessmen in Suwannee County, especially in Live Oak in the 1930s and 1940s. But they opened it up. The 1942 Suwannee Democrats said that it could hold nearly 100 people at the tables and the counter, plus there was a private room in the back to hold events. And the Kiwanis and Rotary Club were two of those clubs that used that private room for their events. It's been vacant for many years. That's a picture of it more recently. This is the railroads. This is Connor Street and Ohio Avenue. In the 70s, I guess it was part of Pick and Save, before Pick and Save moved out to the bigger building, which is now the post office and several other buildings. At one point, I guess Pick and Save, part of it was on this side, and the other part was across the street where Love Inc. is today. So another building that was built or used, wasn't built then, it was repurposed. 1942, December, is when a new primary school opened up. We talked about it last month in some detail, but they named it the Nettie S. Basden Primary School after the lady on the left, Nettie Basden, who had been a teacher that had taught primary since 1907. And I mentioned this last month, but if you weren't here, the funny thing is, within a couple of years, she was actually the principal of the school named in her honor, so kind of funny. As World War II went on, we had more and more people going overseas to fight. And so the local citizens wanted to somehow remember them. And so what the locals did through the newspaper was collect all the names of those who had served so they could make a memorial to them. So it took weeks and weeks to get the names, and you can see a partial listing here of some of the names. It was pages and pages of those who had served. And they got them together, and then they decided to build a memorial plaque on the courthouse square. So this is it being painted in 1944, August 1944. It says there, across the street you can see the old post office building, which is now was a one-story restaurant most recently. People don't realize that building because, or they don't recognize it because most of it is gone. Halland's station was there at one point too. But anyway, it's being painted. I don't know who it is that's painting it, but all those names. You can see here on the left-hand side, in front of the courthouse in 1948, lots of people from Suwannee County that served in the war. Eventually, though, they had to keep repainting it, and it just got to the point where it was kind of an eyesore. And so it was ordered to be torn down in, I believe, the 50s. Now, it was basically plaster and wood, from my understanding. It was not something that was long-term anyway. Maybe at one point they wanted to do, they just, for whatever reason, it wasn't done. So it was torn down. Let's see. Yes. So, while we have most of our men, or a lot of our men fighting overseas and dealing with tyranny and such over there, we have some domestic race-related issues going on here in Suwannee County. This is one of our most infamous race-related crimes. 1944, Willie James Howard, who was a 15-year-old African-American boy working in one of the local stores, he writes this, I guess you could say, love letter to a white girl whose father is very prominent in the community. Former representative, I believe, or the legislator, lots of big stuff. So he was a big wig. And he wrote her this letter basically saying, I wish you were my sweetheart. That I wish we lived up north because, you know, people are more accepting up there, et cetera, et cetera. Don't show anybody. People might get the wrong idea about this. Well, she showed it to her dad, Philip Goff. Daughter's name was Cynthia Goff. And things did not go so well the dad, Philip Goff, took a couple of his buddies, who were also both prominent Suwannee County citizens, businessmen, went and got Willie James Howard, went and basically took his dad at gunpoint to the Suwannee River, Suwannee Springs. And as they wrote in their affidavit the day of or the day later, they basically told Mr. Howard, you have a choice of whipping your boy or stuff like that. Teach him a lesson. You've got that choice. You need to do something to him. So he stops writing, my white daughter. They tied up his hands and feet to make sure he didn't run away. And as their story went, the boy did not want to be whipped by his dad, so he jumped to the river and drowned. Mr. Howard also signed an affidavit saying that same thing. Yes, that's what happened. But then he and his wife fled the county that day. Willie was their only child. They fled the county. Once they got out of the county, he recanted that and said he did that under pressure. That really what happened was they had taken him at gunpoint down to the river and said, your son can either be hanged, you can either drown him or we'll shoot him. And so he was jumped in the river and drowned. It was a big deal. Big deal. So they left town. They never returned to Suwannee County. But some people got involved. Some big wigs got involved. But unfortunately, time of racial inequality, we've got the Jim Crow laws, we've got segregation going on, that quote unquote separate but equal, even though it wasn't going on this era of racial inequality. Really nothing was done. Even big wigs, Thurgood Marshall on the left, who became the first African American Supreme Court justice, was involved in this case. On the right, Harry T. Moore, a local, he was from Suwannee County, but very prominent in the NAACP, were involved. They tried to get justice for Willie James Howard, and it never came to be. Never came to be. And unfortunately, it was not the last time there'd be racial-related issues. We'll talk about more in the next few weeks, or next couple of presentations. But a sad thing, just a 15-year-old boy writing it, and it wasn't even that bad of a level. I mean, that's the original right there that I was just showing you. Reading through it, you know, if I could pick a sweetheart, you'd be mine, kind of. I mean, just very innocuous today. But because he was black and she was white, bad stuff. Anyway, unfortunate that it was happening while we were trying to fight overseas. People like Hitler, who were killing millions of Jews just because they were different. And we were having some of the same kind of stuff here. Other things going on as the war is progressing. J.L. McMullen, who we talked about last month, who at the time became the youngest elected official in U.S. history when he became clerk of court. Well, meanwhile, he's still doing other stuff as he's clerking. And in 1945, he opened McMullen Food Bank. And it was located where the parking lot for First Baptist Church of Live Oak is today. You can see the old part of the old building there in the back, that steeple. He processed country hams, whiteacre cream peas, green bowl peanuts, things like that. But he had this business plus his McMullen Motors Chrysler Plymouth dealership located right there beside it. And he ran that for several years, but that helped also with the locals in preparation of food. Well, World War II in Europe ends on May 8, 1945. Top left, you see some of the surviving Nazi officials surrendering to Allied forces, and that was VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. And then September 2nd, 1945, we've got VJ Day, which is Victory in Japan Day, or Victory over Japan, when the Japanese surrendered on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. This was just after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'll say this, I'm on camera, but I'll say it anyway. There are a lot of people who believe that we should not have dropped the atomic bombs. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But having studied history, if you truly study this war's history, you will find that the Japanese were fanatics. You will find that they had been brought up from a young child into this code of this warrior code of basically never surrendering. And as we went through World War II, as we fought in numerous battles with the Japanese, to surrender was like the ultimate sin. If Allied troops, American, British, and et cetera, surrendered, those troops were treated very poorly, executed. Bataan Death March, maybe you've heard of that, when our survivors from the Philippines were captured in 1942. Thousands died. The Japanese were very brutal, not all Japanese, but some of the Japanese were very brutal. But nevertheless, they looked upon surrender as, just, it's not worthy. So much so that as we started conquering the Japanese, part of the Japanese empire, those islands, places like Okinawa and such, you did not see a lot of surrendering. Compared to Europe, the Germans, by and large, treated Allied prisoners pretty fairly. Again, there's always exceptions. But they were treated as human beings. They were treated as fellow white Europeans, if you will. And most of our prisoners of war that were in, say, Germany, survived the war. Contrary to Japan, just again, treated them very poorly, looked down upon them. They did not surrender. They did not want to surrender. Even as we were on their doorsteps, Okinawa, which was fought in April 1945, was part of Japan's empire before the war had started. It was part of their home islands, they considered. Very few people surrendered, very few Japanese surrendered. And our movement closer to Japan killed thousands of our people. But the Japanese still did not want to surrender. They were offered overtures, olive branches, surrender now. They weren't doing it. These kamikaze attacks, the plane, I'm going to crash my plane, I'm going to die crashing into you because I hate you so much. That was how the Japanese lived. The Japanese home empire, the islands, whole islands, had millions of soldiers still stationed there, thousands of planes, and they were ready. Basically, every citizen was about to be a combatant, was about to fight the Americans and their allies. And so when Japan refused to accept peace offerings, that's when our president decided, at the time Truman, because Franklin Roosevelt had passed away, Franklin Roosevelt decided, okay, let's drop this atomic bomb, this first one on Hiroshima, and let's see what happens. Yes, it killed tens of thousands. Actually, we had killed more in fire raids and bombings of using conventional means on some of their cities. So we killed tens of thousands in that atomic bomb attack, and then gave them another opportunity to surrender. They didn't. And so we attacked 3 days later, August 9th, we attacked Nagasaki. Another atomic bomb. Killed more tens of thousands of people. Finally, the Japanese surrendered. It took those atomic bombs, and yes, they are terrible things, and I do not wish that upon anybody, but to recognize that the Japanese before that, were willing to fight to the last man, woman, and child. And the estimated casualties that the United States and its allies would suffer in the invasion of Japan was going to be in the millions. I think that we got off pretty well considering. Again, it's a horrible thing, and war is bad, war is terrible. But I believe, and this is just me, speaking as a historian, speaking as a whatever you want to call me, I believe that dropping those atomic bombs was what was necessary. And it saved a lot more people than it killed. You may disagree, that's your prerogative, but I'm throwing that out there as a commentary on this war and how a lot of people believe. So anyway, soapbox off. When VJ Day occurred, when the Japanese surrendered and really finally ended World War II, one of the songs that were played or performed was Way Down Upon the Suwannee River. So very interesting. We had several of our people who were killed during the war, and so I've got the next few slides are a partial listing of some of them. William E. Mack, missing in action September 18th, 1944. Mount Deception, Alaska. What happened is I was researching him yesterday. Basically, he was on a cargo plane, a C-47 cargo plane. He and about 18 other people were on their way home for furlough. They had left the theater of war. They were coming home for a few weeks, and because of the weather, their plane crashed into a mountain very close to Mount McKinley, which is now Denali. Was renamed Denali. So he and his the people on that plane died. They never found the bodies, but they found the plane, so he died. Some of these last names you'll probably recognize because we have people here even today with those last names. James Irwin Bell died of wounds on March 25th, 1944, Anzio, Italy. And also notice as I go through this list, look at the different countries. Thousands of miles away these folks are dying. So you've got Alaska, you've got Italy, Bernice Carver killed in action December 14th, 1944, Aachen, Germany, which was basically the first major city in Germany captured by the Americans. Ernest William Collins, killed July 12, 1944, St. Lo, Normandy, France. That was a month after the D-Day invasion of June 6. So he died basically in Normandy. William Mack Harper, who was actually a relative of mine, killed in action April 15, 1945, Tillinghausen, Germany, basically 2 weeks before the war ended. Interesting story with him. Like I said, he was related to me. And several years ago, I wrote a newspaper article on him because not only did I have some family history on him and photographs and such, the Suwannee Democrat also posted several newsletters or letters he'd written because the family, before he passed away, he was sending letters home, back home to the people. So he was telling them how war was, and so the Suwannee Democrat posted several of these letters. And then, of course, they had to post he is missing in action, and he is killed in action. It's very interesting. And just a couple weeks ago, I was contacted by somebody who was working with Arlington National Cemetery, because that's where he's buried, and they posted that newspaper article that I did as part of his information. So if you access some website, you can find that information on Mack Harper. So that was pretty cool that they used my stuff for that. Green Van Howard, killed in action July 8th, 1944, another one in Normandy. Carlton DeWitt Knight, killed in action October 11th, 1944 in Zweifel, Germany. Nathaniel Vasco Landon, killed in action December 19th, Manado, Sleeves Islands, or Slebs, how you pronounce it. That's in the Pacific Theater. And again, Landon, Knight, Howard, I mean, these names are still around in Suwannee County today. Noel Braxton Peterson, killed in Normandy, France, June 10th, right after we landed there. John Paul Pravat, 1944, Barbas, France. John Wesley Rogers Jr. died of wounds in New Guinea, Pacific Theater. Steve Earl Skinner, killed in action in Germany, 1944. Arthur Lee Tapley, killed in Italy, 1944. William Donald Weaver, another one killed St. Louis, Normandy, France. I think that's the same date as somebody else. So several of our folks were killed within that week. So very, very sad. And again, these names and many others are memorialized downtown Live Oak, Veterans Park. So, our men and women returned home. They kind of picked up the pieces, those that had survived, without major wounds anyway. They picked up the pieces of their life, kind of picked up where they left off, but things had changed. We're going to talk more about that next month as we talk about after 1945. But things had changed. More women had entered the workforce, and so from that point on, a lot more women stayed in the workforce. You had also, which again I'll talk about next month, Suwannee was a dry county at this point. After the war, it switched to wet for a little while before it switched back, or vice versa. So people switching back and forth with alcohol. But again, we'll get to that next month or so. This is a map from 1946, closest to 1945 that I can get it. Again, it's one of those very detailed maps that I've mentioned. Lots of details. Technically, every house in the county is located on here, if you zoom in really far. But it shows pretty much a lot of the same communities that existed in 1940. Live Oak, Branford, Dowling Park, Wellborn, Houston, places like that are still there. So, wow, got done early. What is wrong with me? Next month we'll talk about the 1940s, the late 1940s, and the very early 1950s. So any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, musings, disagreements? Anybody awake?
Are you ever gonna have a session just on the war? More concentrated?
I've got a presentation on military history, which encompasses all of our military history. Not one just on World War II. I mean, I could talk for days about it if I needed to, but people might fall asleep. I've just always loved military history. I couldn't serve myself. Do what?
I said, sorry about that.
No, it's fine. No, and I just noticed this morning as I was going through this presentation, just talking about our soldiers going to Fort Jackson. My son went there last year for training and stuff, so it's a little closer to home to me than it usually is. Very interesting, because he's a combat medic, so, very interesting. Somebody, yes, ma'am.
Acre P. McMullen was in the Good Samaritan when my mother was there.
Okay.
And he was a very interesting
Oh, yeah.
person. And,
What I first did before I started publishing books was I wrote for our website, the clerk's website. When I first started, I was gathering information on history, because I always loved history. And I could not find anything recent on Suwannee County's history. And so I talked to Mr. J, Mr. Mack, and he gave me a lot of information that I put into eventually the website, and then which became kind of the beginning of one of the books that I wrote. So yeah, very interesting man, a lot of knowledge, a lot of history. Man, I hate that he's gone, but very interesting man. And in his older years, before he went to Good Samaritan, he would drive that wheelchair, that motorized wheelchair, downtown Live Oak.
oh, really?
He had like a long antenna, whip antenna with a flag. I think my dad outran over him one time because he wouldn't look. He just zipped across the street, not look. So he just went. He was a fun guy.
We talked of the National Guard being split, Europe and the Pacific. Which one went to the Pacific? Well, maybe it was the two of them, because my uncle, he went to the Pacific, Louis.
Right.
And came back from the Pacific as a full bird colonel, and went on to be retired as a Major General for the National Guard. He started at 16 on that building you showed of the National Guard. He joined at 16, and the rest of his life, he went from 16 all the way up to he retired from the Florida National Guard as Major General.
In charge of it, yeah.
Yeah. I can remember, and then you spoke of that being the armory. It was also a nursery, whatever. I was there as a kid when Mom went to work. They had cots.
Okay.
And we were there, and I can remember looking up the Navy base and my first grade teacher up that hill. But we were, the kids, folks go work. We were there in a nursery in the armory. They set up the old army carts that, we were there for a short period of time. I don't know how long. And I guess they converted it to food or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It was lots of different, because we
had
talked
a
about
number.
last month. The top floor was the gym, basically.
Yes.
Coordinating downstairs, yeah. Interesting stuff. Somebody else, yes, sir.
I was wondering, the secondary entrance we were talking about earlier off US 90,
McCrory's?
Halveston, I think it is. The road that runs off US 90.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, that,
You
yes,
were talking
sir.
about earlier?
Yes, sir.
Has it not been repaved since World War II?
Maybe once, I don't know. Yeah, it is a little bumpy.
Is there an intentional reason why it hasn't been repaved?
You have to ask the city of Live Oak about
Maybe a
that. I don't
little,
know. But nudge the city councilman and see what they can do.
okay.
They can tear it up.
I
Yeah.
thought there was a
Because it's
reason.
history.
No, I mean, it's not like that. I mean, they've repaved it before, so. Did you have something?
Yes, I have an uncle that was in the Pacific during World War II. And he got I don't know if it was the black fever or the yellow fever, but they thought he was dead and had him in line with the dead soldiers. And this little corpsman came by checking them out to make sure they were dead,
Right.
and found out he wasn't dead.
Oh, that's good. Better than
And
waking up in the.
they sent him home, and he was in the hospital for months and months,
I bet.
trying to get over the, whatever
Whichever
fever
it was.
he was.
Yeah, that could debilitate. I mean, that was bad.
And he bought himself, when he got out of the hospital, bought himself a convertible and got married. And he was married about 2 months with that convertible. And he wrecked it. And the post that held the roof on cut him right in the throat. And so that was the end of him for sure then.
That's not a good way to go to survive all that.
No, after surviving a war,
Oh, to die.
but he had a little girl with this woman, and she's dead now, but she went to Saudi Arabia with her husband and spent 2 years. And women have no privileges over there at all. They can't buy a loaf of bread.
Nope.
But her sons could go to the store and get loaves of bread.
Crazy.
But they came home, and her husband bought a pawn shop in Greenville, where I was from.
Okay.
And they run that pawn shop for about 6 or 7 years. And she died during that time. She had Alzheimer's,
Okay, wow.
and she died during that time. And her husband kept the house and kept all of her belongings until he met some woman and wanted to marry her too.
Well, that happens sometimes.
And she, so he sold the house and all the belongings and the pawn shop.
Wow.
He just got rid of all of it.
Dropped his whole life.
Yes,
Wow.
and started a new one.
Well, there you go.
But he seems to be doing all right now.
Well, good. Good. Anything else?
Uh,
Well, thank y'all again. Lord willing, see y'all next month. Late 40s.